military discipline, which I have an opinion on that. I mean, you can call it discipline, but it's just basically someone's yelling at you, you do what they tell you. Right. It's not self-discipline, but it is discipline.
Sure.
Sure. I've known people who, when they spit and polish in the military, they get out and they're just slobs. Mm-hmm. I mean, it didn't stick because it wasn't self. But there is that, following orders, doing what you're told. That's there. My brother had joined the Navy, and he wrote back and told me, he says, don't join the Navy. So then I joined the Marines. He said, that's not what I meant. So anyway, and I wanted to, I had this thing, I guess, in my head. I thought, well, I'm going to be in the best. I'm going to go over there, I'm going to be in the best. And of course, the Marines always say they're the best. And I think I'd still say that.
Welcome to How I Embraced the Suck, a podcast where you get to hear from veterans what life in the military is really like. I am your host, Walt, and before we start, you should know that I do not censor the show in any way. You have been warned. Most of our guests are more recent, right. So you're definitely giving us the historical view there. But yeah, speaking of, give me kind of an overview of your time in the military. What branch, where you were, etc.
Okay, I was in the Marine Corps, and I went in when I was 18, right out of high school. Signed up before I graduated, but they had a delay program. And so I went to Marine Corps Recruit Depot, which is the boot camp in San Diego. And from there, Camp Lejeune. No, I'm sorry. Camp Pendleton, North Carolina. Okay. California.
It was a couple years ago.
Yeah, it was a couple years ago. I just, anyway, I know where it is in my head. It's not coming out right. Which was training in those days. It was 1965. You knew where you were going when you joined. And so it was they had a shortened boot camp and everything into Camp Pendleton just to ship out, deploy to Vietnam. And so then after 13 months in Vietnam, typically then they couldn't send you back unless you volunteered. So it was 13 months, and then what do they do with you? So I went to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and from there it was on 2 different 6-month Mediterranean cruises, they call them. And there's a NATO agreement for protection of Europe, the NATO countries. Mm-hmm. The U.S. would have ships and troops there in case there was an outbreak, an emergency. And so what we did during those times was, besides going in to have liberty and go into the ports, but the main thing is we trained with these foreign troops in isolated areas of their countries. And so I had 2 of those and came back, and basically my 4 years were up. Actually, I got out a few months early because I didn't have enough time left.
Oh, they said, to go somewhere.
I'd just be sitting around doing nothing. So they had an early release program.
Okay.
I got out in April instead of August.
Sure.
So that's the overview.
Yeah. So just under 4 years, and that was
1965 is when I went in.
Sure.
It was the big build-up years. People now don't really know much about Vietnam, but when I signed up, I think, well, at least in the fall, in my senior year of high school, I think it was 75,000 in 1964, and by the time I went over, it was 200,000 troops there. It was the big buildup.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we're going to go over and win the war. So Yeah, those were the years. And, of course, it kept building, and it kept on until, 75. But before 65, there wasn't a whole lot going on over there. They had advisors, and there were people there, soldiers there, but not
as many.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So you joined and weren't drafted, correct? Was that before the draft started, or they were less
there
common?
might have been I think there was a draft, and the Marine Corps actually ended up drafting, which was very unusual. And of course, that there's a whole different setting there of why people go in. People were hoping to get the low numbers. There were exemptions, and I didn't wait or try to get out, and I don't know if you're going to get into why I decided to do that or not, but part of that would have to go back to the times, the culture of the time, which I think is different now. It was pretty much across American culture that you served your country. And the military was a way to do it. And in my situation, I grew up in a little farm town in Iowa, and I didn't have any desire to go to college. I didn't really like school at that time. And that was an out of the small town. And I say an out because there's nothing to do there, just farm work.
Sure.
And, I didn't really want to be a farm worker the rest of my life. I enjoyed working on farms, and I wanted to go out and see the world. And my brother had joined the Navy, and he wrote back and told me, he says, don't join the Navy. So then when I joined the Marines, he said, that's not what I meant. So anyway, and I wanted to, I had this thing, I guess, in my head. I thought, well, I'm going to be in the best. I'm going to go over there. I'm going to be in the best. And of course, the Marines always say they're the best. And I think I'd still say that. But anyway, sure. As far as fighters and stuff like that. And so I wanted to be in the best. And I think the only thing in that time, being 18 years old, it makes a big difference. And I remember I had an older brother, said one time, all this preparation, he said one time, he says, Carl, you may not come back. I didn't say anything to him, but it made me think about it. Yeah, I might not. I didn't even thought about that. There's a lot of guys that don't come back, but not me.
Sure.
I'm coming back.
You'll live forever.
Well, yeah. Invincible.
Yeah.
And that's the age group. How do you get a? You used to say this when there's this machine gun bunker on the top of a hill, and the sergeant yells over there, "Hey, Carl!" He went by last name, charge the hill, And what do? You stand up and charge the hill. You get a 30-year-old.
Yeah.
Hey, charge the hill. They look at him and says, "You charge the hill, I'll follow you, maybe." They're shooting bullets at us. But at 18, you're just invincible.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, anyway, I don't know where we're going, but that was my first. That's why I went, really. And it was a mixture of things. Mm-hmm. And it's also a mixture which, if we get into what I learned in the military, the part of the patriotism was God and country. You couldn't hardly separate them. So I was brought up, I think it was just typical. It's almost like a missionary service. You go and do your duty, what do they say in England for king and
country?
King and country,
yeah.
It was the same thing.
God, king and country, maybe.
Yeah, right, God, king and country. Anyway, so and I was a religious guy. I grew up in the church, and that was just part of the deal. But I have you probably heard it, but in those days they had plaques in the lobby of the churches, which is probably appropriate, but I mean, it had those who died in the service, World War II, and maybe some Koreans were added on there.
Sure.
And so they had a listing because those were our parents' age. And, of course, we always had a joke. Was it the morning service or the evening service?
Right.
You know?
Right.
Anyway, but anyway, so that was part of there was 1965, at least where I was. You know, you think of Vietnam and all the protests. I don't think they came until a couple of years later. You know, when I went in, there was no big protest. We didn't. It was still popular.
Sure. Was that the same when you shipped back?
No.
Okay, so it changed just in 13 months.
Yeah, it changed. Yeah, I think it did. And I go look at the history books. You know, you had celebrities and things, and a lot of conflict. And it might be talking about the later '60s now, but I was still in the military. Mm-hmm. By the time I got out in '69, it definitely had changed, and and there was controversial things. I mean, like Martin Luther King Jr. was strongly against the war.
Okay.
Where Billy Graham and people like that, they were for the war. You know, so there was a lot of conflict in those days. You know.
Yeah.
And that would span over the 4 years I was in.
Okay. So when you came back from your tour in Vietnam, were tensions high already then? Like, did you have protests meeting the boat or the airplane? Okay.
No.
I
not that I recall. I mean, I didn't. In fact, I didn't in the whole 4 years experience anything like that.
Okay.
And I know. I mean, some people disagree. I did research one time on this because I was really all the things about how soldiers and sailors were coming back were spit on and called baby killers, and I never had that experience. That may have happened, but looking back at old news, I did this a few years ago, articles. It may have happened someplace, one time, maybe a few times, maybe San Francisco or something. But it seems to me like it's a little, the sentiment in the nation was, let's get out of that war. And,
sure.
And I was ready for that by the time I was discharged.
Right.
And and started going to gatherings and parks and stuff just to see what was going on. That's another story. But the war, that's what I got out of it. That just was wrong. But I didn't see that horrible stuff. Not that it didn't happen, but it wasn't all through. You can't. I couldn't find it in news articles.
Sure.
So I got out and went on with life. In fact, it was still 1969. Yeah, people were still. During my time in it, if I was hitchhiking, which did that more then, you wear a uniform, you probably get picked up for a ride.
Sure. There was still the respect.
So I'd wear a uniform when I was in, of course, and because it helped get a ride. Even with the protests. The protesters they wouldn't pick me up. They probably wouldn't anyway.
Sure. But those were probably more regional, and out in the country or on the roads, people still had a respect for that.
Yeah, well, I was on the freeways. Yeah.
That's probably still, to a certain extent, that's still the case now. Maybe not to the same level.
Right.
But there's still
and part
still
of
kind of that dichotomy, though.
Part of it maybe, and now this is good looking from the historical thing. Of course, wages were different. I suppose minimum wage was a fairly new thing, and I think it was about $1 an hour. But I also recall that we got $70 a month, but it was plus room and board. So for a single guy, it was $70 a month, $1 an hour. Wasn't too bad, but you could do better if you weren't in the military. So that was military pay was a sacrifice at that time. And I've heard they get paid pretty well now, but I don't know. There's a lot of benefits. I think that have been added on. But so then the combat pay in a war zone, which I've talked to Navy friends, if the ship was in the waters, they got it. But that was pretty good.
Sure.
That was pretty good incentive for a lot of guys. You make a little extra money, and of course, if you lived,
sure,
which you weren't going to get killed. That's the other guy, right? If you lived, then you'd have a lot of money saved up. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, you could. Some didn't.
Yeah.
In fact, I don't think I did. not enough to make a difference.
Probably easy to lose it.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, there were things to do. You really couldn't spend it on much. Mm-hmm. And we didn't have U.S. currency there. They had those MPC, military payment certificate. Because of
interesting. Okay.
Black market.
Sure.
So we were paid in paper funny money.
Sure.
Like Monopoly money.
Sure.
But it was worth something to us.
Yeah.
But if the Vietnamese got a hold of it, it was worthless to them.
Gotcha.
Oh, well, they could probably trade things in country a little bit, but not much,
And then when you went back to the States, you could convert it to dollars.
They did it before you left. They did it before you left.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. So you mentioned that earlier. You mentioned you got all the way up to corporal while you were in Vietnam. You didn't go above that?
No.
In the years afterward, a couple of years or 3 years? Well, 2 plus, I guess.
Well, see, the thing of it is, and I mentioned it actually before we started recording.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The Marine Corps, at least at that time, was very difficult to get rank.
Okay.
They didn't give it out real easy. Corporal is an E4, and it was coming much faster. At that time, to get it in 4 years is pretty good. But the reason is, people made sergeant in 4 years. But the reason is because of the war. They got killed, and so they promoted people to that position. And so, I did pretty well. I mean, I had friends that made sergeant. I didn't really care by the time it was ended anyway, but my time was end. But I made that in Vietnam.
Okay.
Not after. So I made it in the first year and a half or whatever.
Right.
And then you just stabilize. So that was a Marine Corps ranking system.
Mm-hmm. So okay. So for example, if you had volunteered for a second tour, would that have accelerated your? Yeah, to a certain
probably,
extent?
Especially to basic sergeant. Mm-hmm. Then there's staff sergeant. There's all these sergeants up.
Sure.
But probably would have. It might have been part of the re-up program.
Okay.
Now, just to give you an idea of where I stood, the lieutenant that interviewed me was my commander at the time. When I was ready to come out, he says, Carl, I have to give you this little re-up speech. He says, now, do you want to? I mean, the way he says, I know you're not going to. I'm going through a formality here.
Right.
So, because I was pretty, as adamant as you could be in that situation without being disrespectful. They knew I wanted out. Yeah.
Sure. You were. Yeah.
I was done. I served my time. So, yeah.
Yeah, I've talked to friends in the military, and that's definitely a common. That's timeless, or at least in that time frame.
Right.
That there's still, if someone's getting out, if someone's contract is up, they still hear that speech, even though
sure,
commanders might know.
I understand that.
Yeah.
Actually, I got a little story on that. When I was, I said that I was on a ship in the Mediterranean, and I went to the staff sergeant, who was actually a couple things, but he was kind of the one in charge and the one that was real strict guy. And I went to him one day and I said, Sergeant Parker, I know you have a lot of pull here. What you say goes, and I've got a suggestion, and you get all the credit for it. He says, when we get back to the States, it's April. And I get discharged in August. And what am I going to do from April to August? It's just costing the Marine Corps money. I'm going to sit around, clean my rifle, march around the parking lot, and I said, if you could just, he just fumed at that. It wasn't 2 weeks later, these orders came through over the, whatever. Orders came through. Anyone who has been in Vietnam and has less than 6 months left or whatever it is upon arrival in CONUS, they call it, Continental United States, can be discharged if they want. So I smiled. I says, thank you, Sergeant Parker. And in the Marine Corps, that's almost insubordination.
Right.
To talk to them like that. But I was what they call a short timer.
Yep.
I didn't want to get kicked out. No, it's not worth it. I'll sit it out.
Sure.
Sure. But I'll push the envelope.
Yeah, when you're short enough, you can walk under your bunk with a top hat.
Right. Yeah.
That's
all those
good.
all those little sayings they had. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So what civilian? We have obviously civilians have kind of an image of what military life is like, or especially in Vietnam, what time in Vietnam was like. What would you say? What civilian perception would you say is the most accurate? Because we watch a movie or something, we're like, oh well, obviously a lot of that's fake or it's not realistic.
Well, I think Vietnam was the first war that people watched on the nightly news. I mean, you've heard that.
Oh, sure.
It wasn't something sent back and put on the newsreel at the movies. Mm-hmm. And I think it's pretty accurate. I mean, people were getting shot at, and the booby trap, they call them booby traps, and landmines, and out in rice paddies, and it was not a place. Once you got there, it's not a place you wanted to be. You're in a strange place. No, I was going to say 2,000, more than that. 6,000, 7,000, whatever, halfway around the world.
Yeah.
Halfway around the world, and you could die there. And that hits you when you get there. All the training and everything. It's just like now I'd be playing video games. I mean, it's just all kind of a fake. I mean, it's not, but in your head, it's not really going to happen. You learn all these little tactics and the bayonet training and, all the things you're going to do. But as a matter of fact, some are a little more than realistic, and I don't just mean the killing and dying, but when the first realization that I had that things were different, we flew. They'd stopped taking boats. They started flying. We flew over to Okinawa.
Right.
And before going to Vietnam, that experience, if you can think about it, so you have these barracks. By the way, they're just rows and rows of bunk beds, right? And all these guys are realizing, I might die. I may never come back. It was horrible. It was horrible. And the I don't know what you call it, depression, but of course, in the Marines, drinking was a big thing anyway. But these people just get drunk and just like they had nothing to live for. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it got better when they got there, and they got into a unit and the guys,
something to keep
but
their mind
it's just kind of like you're sitting there waiting to go into something you have no idea what it is, other than its death hole. And I don't know what went different people's minds. I don't know. I just kind of, I guess I thought about it, but I just kind of observed it. I mean, you couldn't let you get down. You can't go home. There's no way to get out. Mm-hmm. There's no way to get out of it. So, and so that was a memorable. I mean, I can go on with stories, but I mean, they're not good stories. The memorable experience of that layover in Okinawa. And of course, why did I say Okinawa? Okinawa. Anyway, I think it was my first real glimpse of what was going on. And then for me, the second one was, of course, it's typical. You have no say in the military. We landed in July on metal plates in a sandy beach. And that first night there, they called out 4 or 5 names. And one of them was mine. I thought, uh-oh. You know, what's going on here? And that ended up being good for me. But I had no, you don't know where you're going. Because I was placed in the, they call us military police, but the prisoner of war.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Guarded and were part of the interrogator. We weren't the interrogators, but the...
associated with that effort.
Yeah.
Sure.
Now, that was a experience. And then we transported prisoners in trucks to... Well, some of them were going home to their village, the ones that were released. And then some were going to execution. In fact, there's a picture. I haven't found it. I saw it years ago of a Marine or a soldier in Vietnam with his little short shotgun. That's what we carried, these little short-barreled shotguns for riot control type thing.
Okay.
And with this big double-aught buck in them. And with this row of prisoners with sandbags over their heads. That's how we transported them.
Sure.
Put a bag over their head, tied it shut. And that was an anti-war movement. They liked that picture because look, what are we doing here? You know, well, yeah, but this big bad guy with a shotgun, and there's women and children in that line.
Okay,
yeah.
Sure.
So, in fact, that's a whole nother maybe my experience there. But that is part of how military life affected me.
Sure.
So.
Yeah. So was it all Vietnamese that were in the?
Yeah.
So if, for example, if a soldier got drunk or something, was he in a separate facility? Oh yeah. In fact, for a brief time, I was in the prison. I don't know how that worked now. I was looking back. But it was the same unit type of thing. And I was in the compound for the American soldiers, but it wasn't for drunkenness. It was murder. Oh, okay.
Things that they were going
Serious.
to ship them back to the States for trial. And that was a different experience. But this was Vietnamese. And it was in the first camp in Chu Lai there, it was the South Vietnamese. They picked them up for suspicious characters. Now, some would come in all wounded. They'd come from a battle.
Okay.
They were prisoners from battles. And I can't personally verify it, but I had a lot of people say it. The ones that made it were the lucky ones because, I don't know. Somebody could come back and correct me on this, but the typical Marines would just throw them out of the helicopter. They weren't prisoners.
Sure, yeah.
But the prisoners were very important to the war effort because they get information, however little it might be, where the North Vietnamese were, where the Viet Cong, and so that was a bad situation. The prison camp for them, because they had the year I was there, they had a big Hanoi Hannah and Peking Polly were the radio propaganda,
yes.
Chinese propaganda, and they had all the latest hits of American music. You couldn't get that really on Armed Forces Radio. They had good stuff and they had news all slanted. We knew it was slanted. It was just horrible. But anyway, they had this sweet talking girl's voice, and boy, they kept saying July by July, and they had intelligence. They'd say, the engineer, 7th Engineers Battalion is building a mess hall down there. We really appreciate that because in July the North Vietnamese will be.
Oh,
and
sure.
I tell you what, the security was so ramped up before July, which nothing happened. Mm-hmm. And they were bringing in fishermen without fishing license and anything. And
sure.
And unfortunately, I just give it the briefie here. When somebody, and this is part of how the military changed my thinking, is unfortunately, you come in and your interrogation was not, well, they told us that we didn't have to go by the Geneva Convention because these were non-military.
Civilians or maybe insurgents or something.
Yeah, there wasn't a legal army type thing, right? But on the other hand, they had a whole plan that if the International Red Cross came by to clean everything up. It's kind of like, okay, it's okay,
sure.
but it's not really okay.
We may need to make it more okay.
Yeah, and I tell you, these poor people, it was, I mean, torture in a usually non-marking way. You know, the little electric crank thing.
Sure.
And standing with your arms up and, you know, for days. You know, things like that. And then, but the worst part is, then it took usually another month after they were interrogated. And then they get a little piece of paper when they left, right? They take them back to their village. And the paper said, Marine Corps, sorry, we made a mistake. And, you know, we always said, if they came in for us, they went out against us. And the food was so bad, these people who were hungry, they wouldn't even eat it. And it was purposely bad. You know, it's just,
sure.
Yeah, I don't ever come back here again. Well, you know, but, so you get a guy that doesn't have a fishing license and goes through all this torture, and you're held there, your family doesn't know where you are, as far as they know you're dead, and then you're just released. Okay. You know, that's, yeah. Anyway, but the turning point for me on prisoners, was then I went to Da Nang, and I don't know if we turned Chu Lai over to the army or what, but I moved up to Da Nang. It was a bigger place because they had North Vietnamese prisoners there. And these North Vietnamese were sailors. It's a whole story about they took a little PT boat out and tried to sink a U.S. in Haiphong Harbor, and the jets blew them out of the water, and they were survivors. And but they treated them by the Geneva Convention because they wanted to trade them for pilots. And I've looked back into the internet history stuff. They were traded for pilots.
Okay.
And so they were treated by the Geneva Convention. Well, so it's totally different. And they did everything they could. They would sing songs that were propaganda, you know, so the other prisoners could hear it. You know,
sure.
Yeah. But they had the system where you went to their commander and, you know, and so we had, you know, one of the jobs was to walk in the compound with, I think we carried a club, maybe not, in the compound, and there's towers around with the guns. You know, so you had somebody in.
Right.
You don't carry a gun in where the people are.
Right.
And so, but there's nothing to do, so we'd sit there and play chess and talked, and I got to know these guys. See, that's the mistake in a war. Now, I wasn't shooting them, but
sure, but
in fact, I recently saw a movie. Maybe I saw it before, but my son brought it up. I think the name of it is To End All Wars. It's a story about World War II in a Japanese prison camp that was really bad. I mean, the worst of the worst.
Sure.
And
no Geneva Convention at all. Just
and I mean, no, it was really bad. They just shoot people, you know, that type of thing.
Sure.
And it turned around because this one Scottish guy turned the whole thing. He got the prisoners all to kind of at least act like at the beginning, like they really loved these guys. They worked hard. It changed everything. Anyway, there's a line at the end. In Scottish, they might use destiny a little different way we do, but it says, the destiny of war is looking in your enemy's eyes and seeing yourself. And that's exactly what was happening. I started seeing these people as human beings. They had families. Sure. They were fighting for their country. They would do everything. You know, they had things. I said one time, it was a line back then about, North Vietnam, I mean, you're the aggressors here. You're attacking the South. And the guy just looked at me and said, now, where is your country? I mean, who's the aggressor here?
Right.
And I don't go along with their ideology.
Sure.
Anything like that. But as people, they were defending their country. And they had a civil war going on, and they were trying to stamp it out. And, he said one time he gave the number in their army. I said, you can't have that big of an army. He says, everybody is a soldier. He just gave the total population.
Sure, sure.
Yeah, but anyway, that's about all it did. I mean, I just started thinking, and one night, this is unheard of, and it didn't really affect. Well, I guess it didn't. I was in the tower with a guy, and he says, "Hey, just curious, if those guys went over the fence, would you shoot them?" Dude, that's an unheard of question. He didn't wait for an answer. He didn't want an answer.
Sure. Yeah.
In other words, I think he might have been the same way. It's kind of like, what's wrong with these guys? What's wrong with us? And so those are things that really, really start affecting me while I was there. But there again, you serve your time out. I didn't want to. Well, I mean, I could in that situation, because they didn't try to get out.
Right, you didn't have to make that decision.
Didn't have to. One of them had a cast on his leg, and they left that cast up because he had a broken leg when he came, and he didn't need the cast anymore. They left it on so they wouldn't run. They figured they wouldn't leave anybody behind.
Oh, okay. So it was a pretty small group of individuals.
17 of them, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I was imagining a larger prison, but yeah. Okay.
Oh, no. And when I say prison camp, no, this is the one in Chulai. I mean, it was grass huts. It just concertina wire, razor wire. No, it's out there, nothing. This one actually had, I think that one had chain link fence, had a real fence.
Okay.
No, we're not talking about it. And they had little huts in there.
Okay.
There's no big building because nothing was built up. So, yeah, it was a small group. And this is another thing I just think about. One of the North Vietnamese guys told me one day, he said, if we escape, we knew they were thinking about it, of course.
Sure.
And you see me out in the village or something, he said, shoot me. He says, because I'll have to shoot you.
Oh.
And that really kind of hit me. It's kind of, what's this all about? You sit there and play cards and play chess together. But if I see you in the street, I'm obligated. I've got to kill you.
Right.
So you better kill me first. I mean, it was almost like the kind thing to say. Don't hesitate.
Right. Yeah, he was, yeah.
Yeah, in a kind of warped world. It was a nice thing to say. So that's kind of how I left Vietnam. With those kind of thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah. Probably a pretty unique experience. I don't think there were a lot of, I don't know for sure, but it seems like that'd be a small percentage of the soldiers over there.
Oh, doing that job.
Having just being military police in general.
In general, in the army or something, maybe in Saigon, in my directing traffic or something. But
sure. That's true.
That's a very general term, but that's what it was there. That's what we did.
Okay.
They called it military police platoon. We weren't a very big group.
Yeah.
Because the Marines particularly didn't generally keep prisoners. Well,
okay.
See, the ones that were in the that I talked about first, the South Vietnamese, they interrogate them and they turn them over to the South. The South Vietnamese did the the bad interrogation stuff.
Okay,
So
sure.
that way our hands are clean. And then they would ship them out, or they go to be executed is what they did if they thought they were the enemy.
Sure.
And that was turned over to South Vietnamese. And so the Marine Corps, my knowledge of it, didn't really keep prisoners, but then they got those North Vietnamese that the Navy picked up, and the Marines is part of the Navy.
Right.
So we kept those guys.
Yeah. Yeah, and it makes sense, too, because the Marines, they'd probably want, like, the more immediate intelligence. So whatever they could gather from
That's
the
all
South
it was
Vietnamese.
for.
Yeah, and then as soon as they got what little
Yeah.
they could, they passed it on
Right.
to...
Yeah, I think one of the first interrogations as a kid, I don't know, maybe 10 or 12 years old. And the interrogator, and that was a special field there, he was sitting there just talking to the kid, where you from and when's the last time you saw the North Vietnamese regulars, they called them? Mm-hmm. Well, when have you seen the Viet Cong? And they're just kind of chit-chatting. And then this interrogator just, because they're smaller people anyway, he picked that kid up and threw him across the room. There's a big map out there and says, "We know they were in your village. You're lying." I mean, it's all the shock tacky.
Sure.
But that's
Sure.
to get information.
Mm-hmm.
That's to protect our own side. Where the kid would say, "Oh, I've never seen those guys," and so they're trying to get that. And so that you're right. They just wanted information for now. How are we going to maneuver around and where are these two army groups moving to? Yeah.
So obviously your experience in the military was many years ago, but
Yeah.
now if someone came to you and said, an 18-year-old or a 17-year-old, who obviously at 17 or 18, who listens to advice?
Yeah.
But if they came to you and said, "Hey, you were in the military, what kind of advice would you give me? I'm looking at joining, the Navy or whatever."
Yeah.
What would be your advice?
Well, in general, it would be, well, my first response is I wouldn't recommend it. But there's not a war going on right now, of course.
Sure.
So it's not
Yeah.
like you're going to go kill people today. But you are in that situation because you can't get out of it. I mean, you've signed a contract, military.
Right.
You're going to go to,
You can't just go
You're going to
home
go to the
and
brig
quit.
or the jail for AWOL or whatever. You can't just go home. You've committed. The biggest draw nowadays, I think, is training. We'll train you. Now, I found, at least when I was in, they generally lied about that.
Mm-hmm.
We had a guy, aviation guarantee. You join the military. These guys signed up when I was there that they were
Sure.
guaranteed they'd be in marine aviation. Of course, they weren't college, so they wouldn't be pilots, but they were going to work in aviation. They put that off. Of course, you had to go to Vietnam first. Oh, that's fine print.
Right.
After this, and then after that, they never went. Never went. And that was a disillusionment for a lot of guys. I didn't. I signed up. They didn't have to offer me anything special.
Sure.
But and actually weighing it all, somebody who is like maybe I was at the time. There was no place to go and no jobs. There wasn't any training really. I mean, for me, but it was something to do. But you got to really weigh that out. But my main thing would be if someone said they were a Christian,
Mm-hmm.
that I'd say, well, then we can talk something. You can look at the military and say, well, back to the deal, the lifestyle, I wouldn't recommend. The type of people you're around, the mentality. I mean, but most guys aren't going to listen to that.
Well, yeah, of course, yeah.
But and I didn't. In fact, I enjoyed that for a while, and but see, that goes back to my Vietnam experience because growing up, I sent tithe money back to my home church. I was involved, and but I started realizing, and this is why I'm getting into the Christian aspect of it, because I didn't start realizing. I said, the ladies' prayer group back home, praying for me in this war. I said, they have no idea what they're praying for. This is horrible. People are dying here, and we came halfway around the world to do it.
Sure.
And destruction, and just people's life, all that war involves. But seeing it, I realized I had enough Bible training to know this is not Jesus loves me. This I know. This is not love your enemies. Any of that, and so that time there, it was a time of spiritual turmoil for me. It took 18 months after I was out before I really became a Christian, for Jesus is Lord in my life. But because I had a lot of things to work through on that, I was ready to reject it all, and so the. On the concept, if somebody says they're a Christian, and that could mean all kinds of things,
sure,
to different people.
Yep.
But if they're going to claim that, well, then I would strongly dissuade them that, because it's not the teachings of Jesus. Now, I know, obviously, I grew up, people disagreed with that, but I wrote a little booklet 15 years ago, Letter to My Children about God and Country. Because my sons were going, and they wanted to know about this, and then that booklet went out for a few years to military people and things, but it's a scriptural backing for non-resistance.
Sure.
Which
in general or just military? What do you mean by non-resistance?
Yeah, well, because it was my testimony. Well,
okay.
no, it was in general. That's why I named it that, because non-resistance is a way of speaking now. It's like pacifism.
Sure.
But that has all different aspects too. To me, it's taking a human life. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a certain amount of self-defense and defending other people. But for a Christian to take a human life knowingly and on purpose, I mean, you could accidentally do it. Mm-hmm. Somebody's attacking somebody and you club them in the head to stop them, and they die. Well, I didn't mean to kill them.
Sure.
Sure. It's a horrible thing, but to have it as part of your theology almost, that it's okay to go out and kill people and destroy properties and stuff like that. That's kind of where I'm at on that, in a very brief, general way.
Yeah, yeah.
But anyway, so for someone who is professes to be a Christian, coming from the Bible and Jesus' teaching, then I would say, no, I don't believe you can. And a non-believer, of course, they go about their lives in a different way than
sure,
the love.
Sure.
They may be loving people and caring people, but they're not following the Scripture. So,
yeah, different motivations,
right,
for their actions,
right.
Even though the actions themselves might look similar, they have different reasons.
Right, and you could be in a field that doesn't do any of the killing, a supply place or something. Mm-hmm. But I would think, it didn't be my opinion, as a Christian, well, but you're part of the process. You're there, someone else goes.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah. So that about covered that.
Yeah. Yeah, especially now, especially now that there's really no draft anymore.
Right.
It's a lot more of an individual decision.
Right.
Whereas in the past, if someone was drafted, there's famous stories of conscientious objectors or whatever. Right. But now it's entirely up to you.
Right.
You choose to go there.
Yeah. I can't imagine a draft coming back, but you never know.
Yeah. Who knows?
I don't know why they would want somebody who didn't want to be there. But once you're there, you're fighting for your life. So I guess it got you there. When I went to it's 18, isn't it? Is it 18 or 17?
For the draft?
No, yeah, when you sign.
Oh, for the
what do they call it when you sign up? You just tell them you're available. I mean, you're alive. Well, anyway, there's a word for it.
Yeah, it's something to do with
everybody's supposed to do it.
I think it's 18, though.
Yeah, everybody's supposed to do it. And I went to the county courthouse, and the lady asked me, "Are you a conscience objector?" And I said, "What's that?" I had no idea.
Sure.
Here I grew up in church. Well, what's conscience? She said, "Well, that's someone who didn't go to war for religious purposes." And I guess I'm not. Well, yeah, sure. Picked up on that one real quick.
Huh.
But I wouldn't have any support, but
Sure.
to prove it. But
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah. What of all the experiences you had in the military, both over in Vietnam and also, in the Mediterranean and training and all that, what experience would you say impacted you the most? Not just then, but also through the rest of your life. Or what experience had the greatest impact on you, I guess?
Well, that's probably why I went into that, just because it was natural. The experience really was that Vietnam. That Vietnam impact, or the war impact. And it affects different people in different ways, of course. There's people like me who go there and they come back and, boy, they're signing everybody up for the military, and, it's a great thing for them. But it impacted me in the way it did and really changed my life. The whole direction in a lot of ways. Well, and for one reason is those were steps to actually seeking God and finding Jesus as my Savior.
Right. Right.
The other impact, I think, would be, which I would say, to me, it was a negative. And I'll tell you why I think that. I want to think of a couple examples, right? Because it's hard sometimes to say, well, this regimented hierarchy of classes of officers and things, you can say it, but I have a couple examples. One was when we were in the Mediterranean. We were playing these little war games with Turkey, and the whole plan was a 10-day deal. So it's all planned out, right?
Sure.
So we hit the beach off the ships in these little boats, pop-up boat, like World War II. Hit the beach, you play your games, you got blank, so you're popping noises, right? And the Turks are up there. And it's planned that they're going to retreat. They're learning from that. We're learning from, that's the way it is.
Yeah.
It's just training.
Yeah.
And so you hit the beach, and then most of the guys play it like it's a real thing. The ones in the first wave, they just lay there because they probably got shot. And then the second wave, they're the cover. So you go up to their body.
Oh, sure.
Well, I tell you. So this is what happened, though. So we left the boat before dawn, and it was cold out there in the wind. And we call them utility jackets. The Army calls them, the green Army jacket.
Fatigues,
Fatigues, yeah.
Okay.
But we call them utility jackets. Anyway, so we have that on. We have our backpack and our bedroll and all our guns and stuff. And we hit the beach. We run up there. Well, by the time we get halfway up that beach, the sun is beating down. It is hot.
Yeah.
So one guy had the audacity to take his pack off, and some sergeant says, "What are you doing?" He says, "Well, I'm hot. It's gonna take my jacket off." Nobody takes their jacket off until the colonel takes his jacket off. The colonel's back on the ship.
Sure.
It's just kind of one of these. You think this has got to be nuts.
Right.
And the same thing happened going back. An opposite. He was on the beach. We get out there in that cold wind, the water splashing over the deal, and climbing up, those ropes on the, those nets. You climb up, play the whole game. And you're climbing up there. Somebody's on the boat, wants to put their jacket on. Couldn't do it. Colonel didn't put his on yet. It's just kind of like, that to me is just rinky-dink.
Sure.
And so that has nothing to do with the war. That just has to do, I just can't live this lifestyle. And an officer could. There were occasions. They give you a toothbrush and say, scrub my floor, my deal. You have to do it. Sure. And that was the Marine Corps. I don't know if they all did that, and probably didn't do it all the way across the Marine Corps, but they were like, I don't say gods, but you had to obey them. Yeah,
their authority was pretty...
Very strong. And then another rinky-dink deal. When I was on the ship, they found out I could type. Well, back in those days, not a lot of guys could type. And I took typing in high school because in our small community, rural community, the teachers they got were right out of college, and it was a good-looking college girl. I was teaching typing. Kind of stupid, So us guys all took typing, so we could look at her.
Right.
Well, we had to look at anyway, whatever.
Yep.
So I took typing, and they asked if we could type, and I said I could type. And it was a great break because what does a Marine do on a ship? Nothing.
Yep.
Calisthenics, So I was in this office, and some reason the desk was one long desk, and it was all by rank. Everything's by rank. You got the lieutenant, he's on the left, and then you had the staff sergeant, you had the sergeant, and you had the corporal, that's me, and then you had a private. And we're all type. We just do our typing stuff. So one day, lieutenant said, "Hi, Sergeant Parker," the same guy, right? He says, "Sometime today, go down and get some typing paper from supply. We're a little low. Just a casual request." Right? Mm-hmm. Sergeant Parker, we can all hear this, of course.
Yes, yeah.
He turns to the sergeant, a guy I knew, I can't remember his name, but Smith, we'll say. He says, "Sergeant Smith, sometime this morning, go down to and bring some paper up." He turns to Sergeant. He turns to me, Dave, and he says, "Corporal Meese, why don't you run down and get some paper from the now, right?"
Right.
So
the time frame is shrinking.
The only thing that changed, anyway, and everybody could hear it, but the sergeant couldn't talk. So there's a private next to me.
Right.
So I turned to him and I says, "Hey, you know what you got to do, don't you?" It's kind of like, the lieutenant couldn't talk to the private. He has to go down the chain of command.
Sure.
To me, those are just things that it sounds funny, but people live like that. Mm-hmm. Or in North Carolina, when in the fall came and it got cold, and the barracks were cold. Yeah, cold for then, and so people had, "Well, you turn the heat on." Said, "Oh no, the heat goes on November, whatever. That's when the heat goes on. It doesn't matter how cold it is outside." And the same thing in the spring. "Hey, I want to turn the heat off." Nope, the heat goes off on a certain day. It's kind of like, oh, okay.
Pretty regimented.
Yeah, regimented, that's the word, yeah. And I guess I'm not that kind of a regimented guy. And some people like that. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And discipline, hit that one. Mm-hmm. Military discipline. A lot of people think it's a wonderful thing. And it sure looks that way. You just do what you're told. But I realized in there that it was not it doesn't really promote, it could, I guess, to certain people, a self-discipline. You can have, I know one guy, I didn't know him in the military, but he was in for 12 years. So he had to be everything nice and in order, everything in order when he was in. Mm-hmm. But he got out, and in his real life, this guy was the extreme slop type guy.
Sure.
Trash and, stuff like that. And I said, well, he needed that. He needed that, I guess. But that's not really, maybe there's a different words for discipline. It's not really discipline. To me, discipline is self-discipline. where you do it on your own because you want to do it, and that can be trained into place, by the outward. But that's just another thing I didn't, wasn't for me. Not that I'm that disciplined. Maybe that's why. Yeah. Anyway. So so there's the negatives. Primarily, I would say the negatives on my part were against the Christian testimony, right? The Christian life. For non-Christians, you can talk to people who think it's great and things that don't think it's great,
Sure. Yeah, on the discipline thing you'd mentioned earlier beforehand, you saw some people. Obviously, there were a lot of different reasons for volunteering to go back to Vietnam the second time. But you mentioned that I guess the freedom in the combat zone.
Yeah, and that sounds kind of strange, doesn't it?
Yeah. But what about that exactly?
Well, in that war, it's not the same now, but you could only. I think the Army was 12 months, the Marine was 13 months. You had a 13-month stint, and you had to volunteer to stay on. In fact, you had to volunteer to go back. That's why when I came back to the States, you're just kind of hanging out. I mean, we went on those cruises that had to be filled, and but they had a lot of guys coming back, and when I got back, I could have re-volunteered, but to go back, you had to volunteer. And you wonder, why would someone volunteer? Unless you think it's the worst, perverse guys like killing people.
Sure.
Well,
yeah.
And
there may be some of that.
There are people like that. They get into it and they enjoy that. And right. But I wouldn't put that on most. I think a lot of them, the Marine Corps is very spit and polish when they're, in the Marine Corps guards and stuff. Everything is, like we're saying, it's very perfect, and it doesn't fit for a lot of guys. It didn't really fit for me either. But in a war zone, it's not. I mean, if you had a commander that was that way in a war zone, very likely he'd be friendly fire.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Because they won't put up with it. I mean, it could be that bad,
Sure, they're dealing with life and death issues.
You're dealing with life and death, and it's and so rather than come back to that, you didn't have to have the perfect haircut. You didn't have to polish your boots. Shine them every day.
Sure.
Well, you didn't have time for that anyway, but. And things were laxer, even with command type things. They weren't so strict because you had to get along. For one thing, you have to get along.
Right.
Right. And so some that I would know, they stayed over for that. Now me, I figured, I made it. I made it. I'm getting out of here. I don't care. I'll put up with spit and polish.
Right.
It wasn't worth it for me. Even though the job I had wasn't the direct. It was in a sense. We got shot at, and we did things, but in transports and in our perimeter guards and stuff. But it wasn't like through the swamp with a sniper shooting at you. Well,
right.
and the trucks they did, but anyway, mine was for a Marine was pretty safe, and so I could have stayed over, but it just wasn't for me, and the other reasons too. That I just didn't like the war idea, but you could you spend your time at risk of death. That's the problem. Everybody's fear, and there are a couple bad instances of that, is that, and probably more than a couple, that you make it and your last night, you get killed.
Yep.
Yeah. That's a short timer's fear. So, Or the other one was you come back and you're crossing the street and get hit by a car. I spent all that time.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's kind of a little paranoia there. It went on.
Yeah. Yeah, but then the same guy, like you were saying earlier, will charge a hill with bullets flying.
Right.
And not necessarily think much of it at that age and
you're right.
whatnot.
And the situation you're in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's a interesting life.
So did you keep in touch with any of your fellow Marines at the time? I mean, after you got out,
no.
Was it just a done and gone thing?
And there's a reason for that. We didn't have social media, didn't have email anyway, and well, I suppose if we had it, we'd have used it. Even pictures were, now everybody's got a phone.
Sure.
I had a camera over there, but I just didn't take many pictures. What do you take a picture of? I mean, you're the guys, but anyway, but there are some, and I see pictures online. People did take pictures. Sure. But it had to be a special camera, and you had to carry it. Yeah. Anyway, but Vietnam was not, and I don't know how they do in Iraq and stuff, but or did. You didn't really go over as units. You went over as a unit, but it was just somebody would just rotate out, and you get a new guy. So your unit always had the short timers and the new guys. Sure. And so it was kind of a constant move. Some people you got to know. In fact, it's all through, really, the Marines. And so I got a hold of, just through an old letter that that I'd written my parents, a guy who still lived in Moscow, Idaho, and I got a hold of him, and we just had a talk about old times. He remembered things I didn't, and I remembered things he didn't. So that was kind of nice. And then another one, when I was discharged, finally, I was on the boat with a guy. That's the only place I knew him was on that boat. He'd been to Vietnam, same time.
Oh, sure,
yeah,
but different area.
Yeah, now we're in a different unit. All mixed together.
Yep.
And I got a hold of him through Facebook a few years ago. So I kind of know what happened in his life. That's it. Yeah. And we never knew each other's first names.
Oh, okay. Sure.
Very, very few. The last name was your name. It's probably still that way. But, so when you socialized, you just called each other by their last name.
Right.
Now, that's maybe easier to track, but there's a whole lot of Smiths and Joneses and, nationwide. Yeah. Yeah, so that's why I didn't have contact. And then, of course, that was it. You're done, you're on with life,
So while you were over there, or while you were in a particular unit, there was that camaraderie of the unit.
Oh, yeah.
But it didn't necessarily continue after.
No, because
when you moved to another unit, it was
because when I left, just a new guy came.
Sure.
So it was constant. I mean, you could know somebody for a while, but it wasn't. We were just talking a few months, really. It's all less than a year. Yeah. So, actually, in Vietnam, the ones I knew the best were the ones that those names that were called out that night, because we got there together, but we didn't all stay together because I think two of them. This is the mentality. I know it's hard for me to imagine now. They said, I came over here to fight a war. And so they volunteered to go with the other units, which I'd run across them sometimes. We'd be in the back of a truck with prisoners, and these guys marching down the road, hey, and you know what they always say? All they had to talk about. Yeah, McCullough, he died on Hill 57. They just tell you who died. Oh yeah, okay, thanks.
Yeah, that was
and give you some details about it, And I said, I don't know if I really want to volunteer for that. I mean, if they send me there, I'll go, because that was what we're trained.
Sure,
I'll do it. I plan to do it, but I got this little spot, and but not everybody's like that. Some guys struggled with that. They struggle with that, and yet sometimes you talk to a Vietnam vet, and after you talk to them a while, they really weren't much in they weren't much in the war. You know, they're like in Saigon or something. They had some office job or something. You know, whatever. I don't know, but it's kind of interesting sometimes. Yeah, because that's what was expected. You're going to go over there and stomp through rice paddies.
True. Yeah. That's a good point. You kind of have a perception of what you're going to go do, and then maybe you do something different.
Right. I suppose some go over with that, but the Marine Corps is basically all infantry. I mean, they have something.
Sure.
I mean, even the medics are corpsmen from the Navy, so they're Navy, and I mean, there's truck drivers. There are jobs, but there's artillery. I mean, that's still kind of infantry. Yeah.
Yeah, by and large. So, what kind of on the civilian perception of military life? What civilian perception that you're aware of that's not correct would you like to see? Would you most like to see corrected or clarified?
Yeah. Well, and like I say, it's probably the military likely is somewhat different now, but the main purpose isn't. And I think at least on the recruiting effort, and all the advertising, they're really recruiting on getting education, and we'll train you to do this and do that. And that may happen. But that's not really the purpose of the military. Now, it also has the other flip side. It seems like if you're recruiting and building something up, you say, this is what we really do. We have these extra jobs that you're not shooting people. And we hope to get you one. We'll train you to do that. But and the flip side is, it seems like there's I read an article one time called "The Cult of the Uniform." It kind of explained it. And of course, there's people who are anti-military, right? But for the military people, it's just you wear a uniform and you're a hero. Well, you got a job. I mean, there's long-haul truckers that are gone from home for weeks at a time, and they make that sacrifice. I mean, the sacrifice today, now, if they go to a war, well, that's a different deal.
Sure.
But, I mean, just because someone's got a uniform on doesn't mean, there's not a whole lot of war going on now, which is a good thing. That's a real good thing. And, so, and people I've talked to that are in the military, they just have a job. They go to work every day. They get up at 8. They go to work at 8 o'clock. They have a lunch break. They get off at 5 o'clock. And, I mean, that's not how, maybe that's the way it all is now because it's non-wartime. See, my experience was in a wartime. And, but does that make someone a big defender of freedom hero? I mean, they got a job. And critics would say, well, maybe they couldn't get a job someplace. Well, that's fine. You got a job there, but
sure, just because their job involves a particular set of clothes, you're saying that doesn't automatically make.
Well, it's this big sacrifice. Now, the sacrifice would be that they signed a 2 or whatever 4-year contract. They can't get out of it. So, I mean, there's that, but for the most part, most military things now are just a job. And I don't know what the pay is. It might be comparable with benefits. Might be.
Sure.
Oh. Yeah, I think that's kind of misrepresented. And, of course, it's a promotion for joining, of course.
Right,
yeah.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's still, I mean, like you were mentioning, when you joined, that was one of the selling points, and from what I've heard, that still is. The free college or whatever.
Well, that was a slight one when I joined. No, it was a war going on. You knew where you're going.
Sure.
Yeah.
True.
Right.
That's true.
Yeah, I think that's more so now because it's all volunteer, and you got to talk people into coming in.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they do have a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, back then the education was maybe more, we'll educate you in how to do this or that.
Yeah, well, yeah,
Cool job.
The one was aviation guarantee. We would, so it was there, but it wasn't a big flashy deal. They just wanted bodies. Oh, yeah. Then when a war is over, and then they got all these guys that signed up. I mean, they're in.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when they go out, then you got to fill something. I mean, how are you going to get them in there?
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to be the glory of war. And I don't know if I went for the glory slightly.
Sure. Yeah, at 18,
right.
It's definitely a draw.
Yeah, I'll be a hero.
Yeah, I'll come home and people will look at me different.
Man,
yeah, that's for sure. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, well, it's good to hear kind of the historical. I mean, reality. That was quite a few years ago. That was 50 some years ago. That's really a kind of historical.
Yeah.
Not a lot of people have that experience anymore, or were around it then. So it's good to hear that.
Right.
That viewpoint.
And even the wars are different, believe it or not, in 50 years.
Sure,
they're different.
for sure.
With cell phones and texting, and I suppose they do that there. And I don't know what they do at night, or if they have a McDonald's nearby. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah. The experience probably has a lot of similarities,
Right.
but also there's a lot of differences,
Right.
in the day-to-day
Yeah.
living and everything. Yeah. I appreciate that. Thanks for coming on and sharing and being open about
I
it.
just kind of got talking. I hope it.
Yeah. That's
filled the bill.
great. Yeah. I mean, I really enjoy hearing it, and I've always enjoyed history, but to hear it, from the horse's mouth, so to speak, really gives it a personal.
Yeah, it's hard
approach.
to believe for me that it's that far back.
For sure. Yeah.
And it kind of is not hard to believe because it's a long time. But I guess what's hard to believe for me is that there's, I don't know, a large part of the population weren't there.
Right.
They weren't there during it.
Yeah. So you have a unique experience and unique insights that, like me, for example, has no memory of. 'Cause I wasn't there. Yeah.
And so all you do is go by, you can go by old news and things. Mostly you hear about the protest and the anti-war movement.
Sure. Yeah, that was definitely a big
because it became a big deal.
Times. Yeah.
And whatever someone wants to say about it, it did get us out. That movement did get us out.
Sure.
And I mean, there were some bad things done, but the whole idea is, what are we doing there? Mm-hmm. And that's the lesson, I think, for every generation is, you go to war, what are you going for? Why are we there? And Vietnam, good question. Well, if I asked, and I've done that, I've asked younger generation, what was the Vietnam War about? They don't know. Well,
right.
Of course, there's always the real reasons and the presented reasons. And of course, the presented reason was, in case people don't know, they call it the domino effect. Stop communism. See, communism in China, North Korea, and they tried to get all of Korea, and now Southeast Asia, and it's like a domino. Click, 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 click. They're going to get us next.
Right.
Well, it got us involved, and then so we got a democracy in the South that we propped up. Of course, it was known to be corrupt, but it's better than communism. Well, maybe it is better than communism, but anyway, and so we supported the rebels in the South. What it was, and unfortunately, unfortunately for today, they lost. So it is communist, but the dominoes stopped. So war-wise, we get into politics or something.
Sure.
It is spreading. The socialist communist idea is definitely spreading, but just not in that way. Maybe they learned a lesson or something. Mm-hmm. But that's basically what the Vietnam War is about. Now, I've been back over there to smuggle Bibles in, and I was told there that it was for the rubber. See, they have huge Michelin rubber. That's why the French were there. Well, they got rice. They got rice too. And I don't know. Rubber's worth something. Mm-hmm. You control the rubber. I don't know. Seems like a crazy thing to go to war for. I don't know who made money on it other than arms people. But it's a real confusing one. Unless that is true, people were dedicated to stopping communism.
Thank you for listening to this episode of How I Embraced the Suck. If you enjoyed the show, tell a friend. And as my Girl Scout den mother used to say, stay frosty. Did you want any paper to make notes or anything?
I don't think so. I'm just really kind of winging this.
Okay.
I don't know. That might not be good.